Well, good morning, everybody. This morning we have our speaker, Jim Cornell. Jim is known for his 30 years of service and leadership in ACI, the American Concrete Institute, part of technical committees with a focus on producing specifications. He has previously chaired ACI 301 specification for structural concrete. Jim's experience is unique with his schooling in civil engineering and 40 years managing the building construction process as a design build contractor. This field experience, along with application of engineering and specification standards, provides insight on how we should approach the work. More recently, Jim has struck out on his own, consulting on concrete projects, teaching, and litigation. For fun, he is an assistant scoutmaster with his grandson's scout troop. So please help me welcome Jim Cornell. And Jim, I'll go ahead and make you the host.
Thank you, Andrew.
Presentation is yours.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I'm glad to have this opportunity to discuss with you documents that are prepared by the American Concrete Institute that we use in our projects, on our project contract documents, and I appreciate the opportunity. In today's scope, I'd like to discuss how to apply ACI specifications to your project. As we reference ACI documents into our projects, there's certain protocols we should follow. There's some documents that we should utilize, and then there are some documents within ACI that we should not utilize. And what is the relationship of the International Building Code to ACI, and how does the IBC open the door for the use of ACI documents? We'll also cover the interrelationship of ACI documents and how they complement each other and should be utilized in our project specifications. And how does a licensed design professional utilize the ACI documents and ACI specifications? How does that engineer of record actually utilize an ACI specification within the project? And then as a contractor, how can a contractor utilize an ACI spec and also embrace the fact that his project does have an ACI specification? ACI committees, and there's a number of different types of committees within ACI, but it's a voluntary membership. And within our committees, and I'm thinking our major ones like 318 and the Reinforced Concrete Code, and also 301, the specification that complements the code. But how do we work? How do we function? And we start off with a diverse membership. We've got members that are college professors and researchers. We have material suppliers that are intimately knowledgeable about their products. We have contractors to help us with the means and methods, and consultants, as well as other organizations like CRSI or the Post-Tension Institute or the Precast Concrete Institute. So our membership is deliberately very diverse. And that diversity is deliberate so that we can balance our committees, so that no one particular organization or group of individuals can overwhelm the balance of the committee, so that it's one diverse, balanced organization. We have within ACI technical committees like the Curing Committee, the Hot Weather Committee, Consolidation, a number of technical committees that then feed into ACI 301. And the idea is that your membership within 301 is just temporary and not a lifetime career so that it's important that we get the latest technology brought into 301 so that our documents can contain the right information. We also, within ACI, with our codes and specifications, follow the ANSI protocols to ensure that we have generated an unbalanced, consensus-built document. We have a trackable process that includes internal reviews by the technical activities committee, and then at the completion of our document, we also go through a public review where we allow anybody in the industry and even people outside of the industry can comment to the content within our documents. So how do we get an ACI document into our projects? And the reality is that the agencies such as the cities and counties have adopted a building code for those design professionals to follow and for contractors to comply with. And within the building code that is adopted is and they're adopted on the codes are issued on a cycle. And so with that repetitive cycle, the different cities and counties will adopt the new codes as they become available. So that specific code version is going to be very important, and that sets a cascade of ACI documents and which document do you use. You don't use the latest version of a document. You use the document that is driven by the code dates, and that's an important element. The IBC, for example, will call out a specific version of ACI 318. ACI 318 is the building code requirements for structural concrete. It's the structural engineer's code that he has to follow in order to build a structure. And with that code, it gets updated. 318 has a cycle as well that coincides with the IBC cycle. Today, I want to narrow our focus a little bit to really, as my presentation's made, to predominantly focus on building construction, but it's applicable wherever the code is enforced and ACI documents are utilized. A lot of Department of Transportation, TxDOT, for example, they generate their own specifications, and they historically do not utilize ACI 301 and 318. So they're being driven by another avenue. Today, I'll use the term licensed design professional. It's something we've evolved to over the past 20, 30 years. We used to use the term engineer of record and structural engineer and licensed engineer and registered engineer, but today we're really becoming the LDP to cover both the architect and the engineer. In this case today, our focus on the structural design, and so we're really looking at the structural contract documents and the work of the structural engineer of record. The architect of a project is also a significant member of the team providing contract documents, and the structural engineer can sometimes be a consulting reporting to the firm of the architect, or they can be employed by the same firm and be just in different divisions. Either way, there's a little bit of separation between the two entities. The licensed design professional, the structural engineer, will prepare a structural drawing package. And within those drawings, usually at the front end, is 2 or 3 sheets that contain a number of notes. And these notes will identify the base of his or her design, the criteria that it's based on, and the notes will also apply specific direction to the contractor, a form of specifications to the contractor. The notes We'll also address issues related to the scope for the testing agency, what portions of the structure need to be tested, and to what degree, and what ASTM tests as well. Within the structural notes on those structural drawings, the engineer will identify the building code that is being utilized and the publication of that building code. And usually it depends on the engineer, but a lot of time their design criteria will also be documented in those notes, which is convenient for a contractor to know the wind loads and the floor loading as they look at their means and methods. The notes will also state that the engineer uses ACI 318 for their design criteria. Sometimes the engineer won't state what version of ACI 318 he's using. And when I say version, it's the publication date for ACI, but they will document what version of the code. And within the code, you can identify which version of ACI 318 the engineer should have used. It's a better practice for the engineer to identify what version of 318 they are using. The engineer generates these structural notes as a form of specification to the contractor. The engineer needs to identify a minimum amount of requirements, of specify those requirements so that the contractor knows, for example, what strength of concrete to provide, what aggregate size to provide. The 4 durability issues need to be specified. So there is a number of things that need to be identified in those documents relative to the concrete material. Sometimes the engineer of record will, within those notes, will reference ACI documents, but not always. It's a may issue. They may reference ACI documents. They may identify which version of 318. They may refer to 301 or 117, which is the tolerance specification, or 336.1, which is the specification for drilled piers. But that's a lot of times they don't. In my constructability reviews for contractors on projects, it's pretty hit and miss what ACI specifications are actually referred to in the structural engineer's notes. Structural engineer may reference ACI guide documents for the contractor to comply with as well. Within the project contract documents, we've talked about what the structural engineer is going to provide, but also too the project architect will provide a document, and that document will be the recognized project specifications for the project, specifically a specification on concrete, cast in place concrete, maybe a separate one on formwork or tilt wall, or drilled piers if the project has drilled piers. A lot of times the structural engineer, especially if they're separated firms, will not amend those specifications. A lot of times the structural engineer will not have an opportunity to even review those specifications. The project specifications almost always refer to several ACI documents for the contractor to comply with and reference those ACI documents. For sure, the big 3, ACI 301 specifications for structural concrete will be referenced, ACI 117, the tolerances for building construction, and if there's drilled piers, 336. Those are the big 3 specifications that are referenced. There are other ACI specifications Sometimes they'll be referred to, there's a curing spec, a hot weather spec, a cold weather spec. But if you refer to 301, you do not need to refer to those other specifications because 301 covers that subject matter. Sometimes the project specification will refer to other ACI documents that are called guides. They're a document the committee prepares that discusses the subject matter at length. For example, hot weather has a guide and a specification, and their guide goes into detail on how to tackle hot weather concreting. With the structural engineer notes and the architect providing the project specifications, there's invariably going to be some conflicts between those notes and the specifications. And it'll be up to the team to work through those conflicts. There's also going to be improper referencing of ACI documents, and those will also create some conflicts and maybe in the design professional, the specifier thinks that they're covering the basis properly, but in reality, some of those documents can generate some subjective language and also too then some conflicts. As we discussed through the 318, the building code for structural concrete, you'll notice that I have version 14. It was published in 2014, and it is the version that the IBC, if you go read specifically your city IBC version, it'll describe what version of 318 is being used, either ACI 309 or version 2009, 14. There's now a 2019 version, but the codes have not been republished, so that version is not applicable yet to a specific building code. Outlined were published every 5 years on 318, and that's deliberate to keep it current and true to the industry. The document is written to the licensed design professional. It is giving guidance to the licensed design professional on the minimum requirements that they need to design to. Now, that's not to say they can't exceed those minimum requirements, but the point is it's written to the design professional. It's not written to the contractor. It's not written to the testing agency or the owner. And really, to be true to form, in our project documents, our drawings, our notes, our specifications, we should not be directing the contractor or the testing agency to ACI 318 for specifications. Currently, we are using ACI 301 that was published in 2016. This is specifications for structural concrete. It also, like 318, is published every 5 years, but it's out of phase with 318. It lags by 1 year. So as 318 is published in 2009, that gives ACI Committee 301 12 months to then update 301 to the changes that are in the code, because we want to make sure that the 301 document complements the previous version of 318. So in this case, we've got the 2014 318 building code, and the complementary specification for the version of the code is the 2016 version of 301. There's been published the 2019 version of 318. There's just last year we published 2020 at 301. And we missed the 2015 date by 30 days because of some publication and workload of individuals. But that's why that date missed by a year. An important element is the specifications are written to give direction to the contractor. They are very, very specific. We're not given direction to the design professional. We're not given direction to the testing lab or to the owner. The specification is written to give direction to the contractor. It's written in mandatory language. We try to make them clear so that there's only one very narrow interpretation, and that it's not subject, there's no subjectivity to the language. The other is 301 covers the whole subject of structural concrete. And that whole subject is covers everything within the 318 code as it relates to structural concrete. So it complements the code. You've heard me identify earlier ACI guides, guide documents. Guide documents are prepared by ACI committees. They're updated and republished in theory every 5 years. They're not as rigid as specifications, so that sometimes they get updated between 5 and 10 years. Sometimes a little bit longer. Usually you get in hot water when you do that, and you're not able to, you then have to comply as far as the committee. It's written in a communication style that delivers all the options on a subject. Unlike a specification is very narrow, an ACI guide is very general, and it's open to interpretation. It can be interpreted in a number of different ways, which for a legal document would generate conflicts. So you see on the first page of our committee reports and guides that are published by ACI, you'll see this box generally in the lower left corner of page 1. And this, what's real important for today is the second paragraph, first line. Reference for this document shall not be made in contract documents. And items found in this document, in this guide that the AE wants to utilize, have to be restated in mandatory language before incorporation within their project. Just a little bit of a rabbit trail. ACI has recognized that within the industry, maybe people really don't recognize what 318 really is, that it's a code. So we've come to a new method of publishing so that in the future, the 318 will be issued officially as ACI code-318 with the publication year. Just the same, ACI 30120 reads with this language. In the future, in 25, when we issue the 301 spec, it will actually say ACI spec. This will help to clarify the differences between ACI documents, the difference between a code and a spec. In this case, SP 66, SP is special publication, is going to be renamed into ACI manual, ACI MNL 6620. This document is actually issued with this new nomenclature. Previously published documents will maintain their old name, and the new documents will receive the new nomenclature. ACI 302.1, most of you are familiar with the slabs guide, but it'll be PRC 302.1 when it is published here in the near future. So to talk about 301 specification specifically, the body of the spec is that portion of the ACI document that provides direction to the contractor. It tells the contractor how to do it, what to provide, and where to how and when to install it. Section 1, for example, of 301 addresses any references that are utilized. For example, ACI 117, tolerances is a reference within the body of the spec. ASTM tests like C94 is also referenced there. What's important about section 1 is it covers how to handle the acceptance of the project, how to handle the acceptance of concrete specifically, and how, for example, how are the strength tests analyzed, and if those strength tests don't comply with the specification, how to address it when they don't. Indirectly, we describe some testing agency information in section 1 as well. But what's important in section 1 is that for both the contractor now understands how his project's going to be accepted and what the rules are. And for the design professional, it gives them an outline on how to do it as well. Some of the basic sections that follow section 1 is there's a section on formwork, reinforcing of the concrete material, and then a section on handling, placing, and construction concrete. These sections here are really the bread and butter of ACI 301. We then also get into some very specific specifications, specific about a special scope of work, whether it be architectural concrete or lightweight concrete material, post-tensioning concrete, precast tilt wall. A lot of those specialty scopes are also covered in 301. There's a second part to the specification, and that's the notes to the specifier. And those notes to the specifier provide direction to the licensed design professional on how to use the specification. And within those notes are the mandatory checklist item. For example, the specifier has to tell us what strength of the concrete is. What is F prime C? In my example here, there's a mandatory checklist item for the freeze thaw of the concrete. What is the exposure class? In this case, it's to identify the exposure class of F3 is special, and you need to indicate if it's plain concrete or not. And we try to always refer to a document rather than write about it, just make a reference to where to go find the information, more information to make a decision. There's also an optional checklist item on something that maybe the specifier wants to change the default that we have in the ACI spec, or maybe they want to learn more about what's there to make a decision applicable to their project. So we try to identify, in this case, my example is how you mitigate ASR, alkali-Seneca reactions. This is a very complex subject matter. We first put ASR in the 16301, 2020. We updated our what we've learned in this subject, and so we feel we've got the latest in technology information, and here we help the design professional learn more that they might need to make a decision on their different strategies for handling ASR. So again, the optional checklist is usually in response to a default that we've written into the specification. To help the licensed design professional and the contractor identify trigger language is used in the body of the spec to flag when you need to go to the mandatory checklist. In this case, we use the words as indicated in the contract documents. That for the design professional, it'll state provide F prime C, for example. If we've already specified a default requirement, we might say, for example, unless otherwise specified, 95 degrees is the maximum concrete hot weather temperature. And it's up to the design professional to accept that default requirement, and they generally do. But if they want to maybe make a modification, it's a flag for them to go look at the optional checklist item. We also use some trigger language when there is not a default. We'll state if specified. For example, the different types of finishes on concrete walls will state if specified, if a float finish is specified, or a cork finish, or that will be identified if specified. So in the contract drawings, the licensed design professionals going to have to identify where that's to be utilized. Some of the advantages of using ACI 301 is the depth that the document goes to, and the fact that it's thoroughly vetted out by this 65 engineers essentially to ensure that we cover the ground properly. For example, the concrete material, to merely reference 318 doesn't necessarily address in detail how you should be supplying the concrete. The concrete material providing F prime C isn't the answer, as we all know that we've got to provide what's called the required average compressive strength, and that's the statistical method to manage a strength contingency. That's where the contractor will actually provide concrete stronger than F prime C. And part of this is statistically so that we can ensure that our concrete does indeed meet or exceed F prime C. How we manage water on a job site in a ready-mix truck is very clear in section 4321 on how the contractor can add additional water or add mixtures to the ready-mix truck. Defects. We identify defects in formed surfaces in sections 5333 through the surface finish criteria, a significant issue that was added in 2010. In order to invoke the specialty sections, the engineer of record needs to call out that certain portions of the structure are post-tension, for example, or in this case, architectural concrete. I recently reviewed a project where the architect identified the lobby ceiling was going to be cast in place, pan slab, but exposed in the lobby, and they wanted tolerances to be tightened up. They wanted brand new pan slabs in that area. It was not a typical pan slab, but to be treated as architectural concrete. The issue here is they very specifically identified that local area so as to invoke the architectural concrete specification of 301. We struggled to come up with a universal definition of mass concrete. 30, 40 years ago, it was identified as any concrete with a thickness of 4 foot. Well, that turns out not to be a good solution. And so it's up to the licensed design professional to designate what areas, what portions of the concrete is mass concrete. So that, for example, if we've got a mat, that mat foundation, that's going to be identified, or maybe we've got some large columns on our projects, or some spread footings, or a linear accelerator walls and vault to stop radiation. And so those have to be directly called out as mass concrete to invoke ACI 301. Durability is section is literally just like 318, so that the sulfate resistance and the freeze thaw and and the chloride ion content, all that is covered in 301 in that section, just like 318. Something new that came out in 301.16, version 16, is how to address slump. Duff Abrams developed a slump test 100 years ago to measure workability. And at that time, water in the concrete also was detrimental to strength. And so it was a wet concrete usually was a concrete that would not be acceptable strength. But today's arsenal of admixtures has removed that correlation of water content to strength. As for example, we've got the extremes of self-consolidated concrete that are literally like water, and so that we've got other resources as far as mid-range and high-range water reducers that give us high slumps and great strengths. But the idea of workability is really become a contractor issue. So in 2014, an engineer made the motion to change the language in 301.16 so that the contractor would specify the slump rather than the licensed design professional. And this performance-based specification allows the contractor to balance means and methods with the economics of concrete placement. If they're going to use a laser screed to place the concrete, they're going to need a slump of maybe 5 inches. If they're going to hand straight edge, maybe they need a slump of 6. If they're going to use a slip form, maybe they want a slump of 3 or 4. So again, it's up to the contractor to decide his means and methods and what works the best economically. 301 invokes ACI 117, in this case published in 2015, the specification for tolerances for concrete. This is very important to have in your specifications, your project specifications, to define what the tolerances are. And that's an important element. 301 does reference 117. The advantage of 117, it also defines how we're going to measure the tolerances for floor flatness, for measuring the gap method. We using a straight edge or the face numbers, or how to measure for thickness. A lot of those are the measurement procedure, and the analysis is defined in 117. To update you a little bit on ACI 117, the specification was not republished in 19. It is going through a major format change, and it's taken us longer than we intended. We do have the goal to publish in 2024 so that we complement the 2025 301. Our tolerances, or the verbiage, is going to disappear, and we're going to communicate with drawings, and it has just taken us longer to do that than we anticipated. We also want to address the issue of laser scanning and GPR, new technology. GPR is not necessarily new, but how do you actually do the measurements and analyze those measurements? That information is yet to be defined. And then 117 is collecting a database of tolerances to confirm what we're recommending and specifying are achievable and realistic. ACI 336.1, specification for drilled piers, has not had a major rewrite in 1998. In 2001, it was updated, but it was an editorial update. And currently the committee has gone through a TAC review, and they're addressing those TAC comments, and hopefully in about 2 or 3 years they'll go to a public review. So that is actively being working. SP 66 you're familiar with. It's the new document has gone through a major rewrite in 2020, and it now contains 315, the guide to presenting reinforcing steel design details. It contains new updated details that have gone through a constructability review. Those details have a complement of checklists that the licensed design professional needs to review as they use those details, and you can download those details for incorporation into your documents as well. The third section within the new manual is we've published a lot of written published references so that you can go look and study and maybe help yourself make some design decisions, but the publication references are there. So some of my recommendations today to those within this organization that are maybe drawing the structural drawings and making the notes, or the specifiers that work for a design firm, is to encourage the reference to the big three ACI specifications of ACI 301, 117, and 336.1. These are fully developed specifications, and they clearly cover the subject matter very thoroughly, and they're a good asset to both the design professional and the contractor. I want to encourage you not to refer to the code for the contractor to comply to the code. It's more important that we utilize 301 and comply with 301. The ACI guides, I didn't go into a lot of detail, but the guides are not written in mandatory language and are open to subjectivity. I've had some consulting issues at times to clarify people that are using the guides incorrectly or misreading it and applying it improperly. So please, the advice here is not to use guides. I'd like to encourage all of you to generate some education units and study the new manual on 66, and to also dig through ACI 301 and 117, and go through the checklists on 301 and 117, and how do those really work, and how are you really specifying your projects. ACI's got a lot of new products out there for the design professional to utilize and the contractor. For the design professional, we've got 318 Plus, which is a new online product that covers the code as well as the ACI detailing manual, but it gives the design professional and his team a way to use those products on their specific projects. There's also some online learning documents for ACI 318 and 301 that are available for you to learn with. Convention sessions are now online from previous sessions. We've got 301-20. We'll have sessions at the Atlanta convention in the fall, and that'll introduce the changes that are made on 301-20 versus 301-16. Some other documents that are available are for your use or guides, Concrete International, a magazine published by ACI, as well as our journals on design journals and our material science journals as well. I'd like to invite all of you with that closing to the ACI convention in Dallas. It's going to be in fall of 22, and there'll be some Tuesday will be a target date that might be a good day for you to be able to attend a number of sessions that'll be focused on the licensed design professional. Also want to close with an invitation to you to join ACI, whether or not you're an engineer or an architect, we need experienced practitioners. 30 years ago, I felt like I was the lone contractor that was at ACI, and that has changed over the past 30 years. We've now got design professionals within our technical committees that help us have a consensus membership, and we need more engineers and more architects within ACI to help us with our documents. This diversity of our membership within our committees is an important element so that we bring a good document to the industry. At the same time, you're working to enhance our documents, you're going to indirectly increase your knowledge base at the same time. It's rather amazing what you can learn as you sit in a committee meeting. And reach out to an ACI member and come join us. Come join us. I'd be love for you guys to get in contact with me if you're interested, so that we could talk through the advantages. And with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity today to present ACI documents and how we can utilize them on our projects. And I thank you again.